to journalists and stakeholders about the importance of going back to basics. They were punting this morning, saying that journalists really need to go back to basics, including going back to media ethics in how we report on our stories and how the media works in relation to government officials. Now, it was very robust, with several questions being asked by journalists as to how to tackle very serious stories. And one of the issues that came out was also the covering of the COVID-19 virus in the country. I do have with me the Sanef chairperson of Media Freedom, Mary Papaya. Mary, very interesting, robust discussion. I'm just going to go right into it. Going back to basics. That is the word, and that is the punting that happened this morning. Why should we go back to media ethics and the basics of storytelling?
Thanks for having us. Fundamentally, we've reached a point in our democracy where media and journalists are coming under increasing threats from various sectors. The need for basics of reporting around ethical journalism is really the fundamental, simply because we're seeing what's happening on Twitter, where the safety of journalists are being hampered by constant trolling. There's infighting between media houses and journalists coming to the fore, making the headlines. There's also the public's trust in media that has diminished considerably. From that perspective, it's important for journalists to keep their eye on ball, making sure that balance and fairness and all sides of the story is constantly at the fore. Today we heard how journalists get calls from politicians, the interferences within the newsrooms, self-censorship, the pressure being put on by advertisers, diminishing newsrooms, lack of resources, and poor business models that's seeing a huge number of journalists being retrenched. So it was a nice gathering to regroup, to look at the challenges that we're facing, but also to come up with simple and realistic and practical plans to make sure that the ethics of journalism is being maintained at every level.
Just jumping into credibility, we obviously know that the coronavirus is one of the biggest stories in the country and possibly internationally as well. In terms of journalists reporting on the story and being mindful and, as you said, being ethical, because honestly a lot of journalists are trying to figure out who the patients are, they're going to the hospitals. In terms of the boundaries, where do we draw the line, Mary?
So COVID-19 is certainly the biggest thing to hit our shores in recent months, and it's going to last for a long time. If we look at the issue around the infected, the doctor that was interviewed made it very clear that doctor-patient confidentiality is something that media must adhere to. The frightening thing about journalists trying to go undercover to hospitals is that not much known is about the spread of the disease. We're seeing carrier reports about individuals who were cleared, who are now not cleared but passing on the virus. So for now, it is important that journalists maintain all of the rules of engagement that's necessary to get the story out, and that is remaining factual, making sure that all sides of the story is being heard, looking at the mandate that journalists should have around education, making sure that as the story breaks and unfolds, that the facts are put at the fore, making sure that experts are given a voice to talk and conscientize us and educate us about what's happening. There's so many elements to the story. There's a lot happening in South Africa. We know that the South Africans from China are being brought back home. They will be under quarantine. So the important thing is not to cause panic, but to look at the story in all of its entirety by making sure the facts are put on the table. We also know that in any virus situation, in any disease situation, when there is not much known, there tends to be a stigmatization of things. From that perspective, it's important for journalists to understand that and to also make sure that when reporting on it, to abide by the wishes of the infected. If they don't want to be known, they don't want their names mentioned, make sure that that doesn't happen. From the perspective of children, it's important that the rights that are afforded to children are maintained. And it's just one of those situations that journalists have to constantly be guarded and guided by the policies that cover how we report things.
Thank you very much, Marion. It's also very interesting, especially for those journalists who are covering the coronavirus across the country, just to be mindful when reporting and ensure that when you do report, you practice those basic ethical reporting, like Sanef is saying, going back to the basics, but also ensuring that your reporting is factual and does not create panic across the country.